Okay, we're just setting things up, everybody. Won't be long. Oh, I can see Paul. I will invite him up. Okay, we're just setting things up, everybody. Won't be long. Oh, I can see Paul. I will invite him up. Okay, we're just setting things up, everybody. Won't be long. Oh, I can see Paul. I will invite him up.
I seem to have a microphone. Oh, there I am.
I wondered where I was.
Couldn't see me. Which is always a pleasure when you can't see me, to be honest with you.
Fantastic.
Let me just put me on camera as well.
There we go. How is that?
Fantastic. I'm just slightly.
I can't hear you.
Hold on, I'm just slightly struggling to get back in.
Technical problem, Emma. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, Paul? Paul, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep, you're coming through on Clubhouse.
Okay, but I can't see you on the on stage. Are you on stage? Oh my God.
Okay, I can see me on stage. I couldn't see me on stage earlier on, but I can see me on stage now.
Okay. Are you a moderator?
I'm not a moderator.
I'm having a lot of problems. This is frozen on me.
I remember you had problems last week with your Clubhouse as well, I think, when you were interviewing Dave, because the Clubhouse interview didn't go up. The one on YouTube did go up, and people can see that if they dive onto YouTube when you were interviewing Dave. Good fellow, but there was no Clubhouse recorded.
I know, I don't know why. I wasn't in a...
And you're not recording Clubhouse this week either. So I think it's the way you've set up the Clubhouse room that you haven't set up the record before you went in.
You see, I double checked it this time and it did say it was recording, so I don't know.
It's not recording then, because it says recording at the top when it is recording, and it's not showing as recording at the top.
Okay, well, at least we have got a recording, if annoyingly not on here. We have got one, so. Okay, I just have a major issue with that. Anyway, maybe we'll just keep going because, yeah, let's just keep going, Paul. I can't actually access anything with Clubhouse, but if you can hear me, I'm presuming that everyone else can hear me. So we'll just keep rocking on. It's being recorded here on Zoom, and we are on live on YouTube. So let's keep going. Welcome, welcome everyone. So sorry about this. I don't know what is going on with our tech. It is a little bit challenging, but hey ho, we're all here now, which is what we want. And I'm really thrilled, as always, to have the fabulous Paul Merrick on here. So I've asked Paul to come up here and have Can you hear me, Paul? I can't hear you, Paul, now.
You've completely disappeared from Clubhouse.
Are you still in there, though? Are you still in there?
I'm struggling because I can't hear you at the moment. Okay, I'm now back on sound on Zoom because you've completely disappeared on Clubhouse.
Okay. So you're still in there.
I'm still on Clubhouse. Just give us 1 second, guys. We're just trying to sort out the technology here. When Emma's clear.
Oh, sorry, getting Emma has clearly disappeared. Oh, she's back. Cool. She's back. And she's made me a moderator as well. That's fantastic. So we're 12 minutes past 12. 12 minutes to get the technology right. And 48 minutes to talk about what we're going to talk about. That seems to be the case.
Oh my gosh. There we go. Okay, well, let's just jump straight on. Paul is here because we want to talk about property business planning. And as we know, Paul has written with his lovely wife, Margaret Ann, Unpacking Your Property Business Plan. And I am really keen to move all of my interviews to understanding more about business and property business, because inherently a lot of people just think about property and they don't necessarily think about business. And just absolutely love all things business, and I'm in the business of property, so we will jump straight in. So just Paul, if you could give us a bit of your background just for anyone who's new, and then we can jump straight into some content.
Okay, so Paul Merrick, I've been in business for 45 years. I started my first business when I was 15, so for anybody who wants to do the maths. I've been in property for 3 decades as a property developer of commercial property and residential property alike. We've got a reasonable sized portfolio of commercial and residential property that we let, and it's all debt free. In fact, I'm in the process at the moment of currently selling up our debt free portfolio of commercial and residential properties, as well as some development sites, as I move to being an angel investor. I have also spent a percentage of my career, in fact, almost 20 years now, being a business consultant for major PLCs, for regeneration agencies, and for smaller businesses alike. And as I get into my maturer years, we shall call them, will we, Emma? My maturer years, I'm spending more and more time doing business consultancy because I very much enjoy doing business consultancy and helping smaller businesses kind of grow. And I've kind of changed the business model over the last, I would say, 3 years, whereas I used to do the vast majority of any consultancy work for major PLCs and for things like regeneration agencies around property. I've now moved to kind of smaller businesses and even down to kind of one-man operations, because I just find that a more interesting thing to do with my mature years. It's quite interesting, Emma, that when you work for these large corporates as a consultant, you get paid very handsomely, but you're a very small cog in a huge machine, and you can't on a kind of easily or readily basis turn around and say, I made, £100,000 or £1 million difference to that PLC's bottom line, because the bottom lines of PLCs are so large that even if you do add £1 million to the bottom line of a PLC, it's almost insignificant. Whereas working with smaller businesses and small individuals who are starting in business or trying to grow their business, if you add the bottom line to a business like yours of £1 million, I would imagine that's a substantial difference in the bottom line. So I'm very pleased to say that that's what I spend a lot of my time doing now. And that ties nicely into the subject for today, which is about business planning. Because I think the mistake that most people make, particularly in the property sector, in fact, more in the property sector than any other sector I've ever seen, is that people kind of get into business and hope that it's going to go okay. and they don't really plan a business. And if you don't plan a business, there's an old adage that says, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And if you don't plan a business right in the first place, then there's so many issues with that. And that's what I'd like to spend a percentage of today talking about is, you know, I know there's going to be people sitting listening to this, whether it's on Clubhouse or whether it's on, you know, Facebook or whether it's later and it's on YouTube saying, but Paul, I only want a couple of buy-to-lets, or I only want half a dozen buy-to-lets. Why do I need a business plan? And I was talking, I've been on Clubhouse for about a year now, and one of the things I say on a regular basis, and I think it's worth listening to, because I say lots of things on a regular basis, but I'm not sure they're all worth listening to.
Well, we're all here listening to you, so that's good.
One of the things I say on a regular basis that I do think is worth listening to is about this great thing called mindset, right? And the mindset of having a large business mentality inside of a small business. So we started our career in property with £40,000, and we now have a multi-million-pound debt-free portfolio. And to give you an idea of scale, two of the development projects that I'm working on at the moment on properties that we own outright with no debt. One has a GDV of 15 million, one has a GDV of 23 million. And yeah, that's over a 30 years career, but there's many people who have been in property for 30 years and have half a dozen buy-to-lets. Now, would I say that I'm smarter than them, that I'm more capable than them, that I know more than them? No, I wouldn't say any of those things. I would say we had a plan. We had a roadmap that took me to where we are today. And most people don't take time to sit down and write the roadmap. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But with that, do you not think that do you think having a plan, so in that most people would think, well, to me, one thing that jumps out is, and not to go away from the point, but I want to ask the question, risk taker. So are you saying that because you have a plan and a very detailed plan, which, you know, I know a bit of the background of it, you were able to push forward to get to being a, let's say, even though a small fish in a big pond, to now become a bigger fish in a smaller pond, so to speak, where you were able to see much bigger because you had that plan in place?
Well, I think given the current circumstances and looking at where interest rates are going and looking at where the economy is going, I want to take you back to 2007, right? And we started buying property in the early to mid 90s. And we bought every year up until 2007. Now, I'd love to say that I had a crystal ball in 2007, but I didn't, right? What I had was a sense of the marketplace and a plan. And what my plan said was, if properties get to this value, right, then it's unlikely that there's any profit left in them. Because the margin between, and we're moving away from this luckily now, but everybody will relate to this. There's been a point over the last 3 to 5 years where the price of property the price of purchasing property has kept climbing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But the sale prices haven't climbed as quickly as the prices you're having to buy stock for. So the margin has been squeezed. Well, back in 2007, it got to a point with us where, because I was looking at a business plan, where there's a minimum margin we could work on, and I just couldn't find that margin in 2007. So I stopped buying. Now, many people will say, that's lucky, Paul. It's lucky that you stopped buying just before the crash. But it wasn't lucky. It was because I had a clear business plan with a clear margin in it. And when we couldn't reach that margin anymore, the business wasn't functioning. So we just stopped buying property. Now, hindsight, 2020 vision, lucky. What that meant was that the money that we would have normally spent in 2007, we hadn't spent. So by the time the market kind of corrected itself in 2008, we were sitting on a little pot of money that made us very good buyers. And by that time, the margins had started to creep wider again. So that way we were set up very, very well. Now, you know, one of my kind of pride points, if you like, looking back on our journey, is the fact that we kept developing and making money out of development in 2008, 2009, 2010, when many of my peers had left the industry entirely. Because I think the difference between them and us was they were opportunists and we had a business.
Yeah, amazing. So going back with that, so obviously some people could have been in property for 30 years, have got a few buy-to-lets. You clearly have, have an incredible portfolio and to be in the position you're in now. But do you think that potentially, those people just didn't have a big goal? What do you think would be some of the key differences? Obviously, we've got a business plan and we're going to jump into that a bit more, but even consider and to have a starting point, do you know what I mean? I find that a lot of people, and especially I sit down and help some people gain some clarity in their journey, and for most people they just have no idea where that end goal is. Did you have a very clear end goal? How did you come upon this plan to have a plan to get somewhere?
It's because I came from a business background. So I came from business into property. So I just treat property like any other business. Even my borrowing was different because we've never had a mortgage other than on our own home. And what I did was I sat down and wrote a business plan and took it to the bank, and they gave me what was called a hunting fund, right? Which wasn't tied to any specific property, but was a six-figure sum that I could go and spend on any property that I wanted, because they believed in the business plan. And I remember I was smiling there, and people who are looking at me on YouTube or on Facebook will see that, not so much the people on Clubhouse, but I was smiling as you were talking about goals, right? Because I remember having a conversation with a chap in the early days, and I'd sat down and slaved over this business plan, right? And he had a dream board, right? And we were having a conversation, and he said, I've got the same as you, I've got a plan. I said, let me see your business plan. And he was like, no, it's my dream board. And I said, well, I'll tell you what to do. You take your dream board to the bank on Monday, and I'll take my plan on Monday, business plan on Monday to the bank, and we'll see which one actually gets funded. I'm not sure of many lenders that fund goals or, these dream boards, whereas funders will fund a real business plan. So I think that's one of the differences. So I'm sorry to say I've never had a goal and I don't have a dream board.
Okay, I love it. So with your so sort of jumping into the business plan for you, do you always just to sort of start? So I've got your book here. Do you literally start from the beginning, looking at your executive summary, elevator pitch, or are you starting with, because I know you always talk about a lot about who is the sort of end consumer, so to speak. There's with what you've created, there's kind of so much, and even like me comparing our hotel. So what we're doing at the moment is we're working through your book, in fact, on the business plan to create a hotel chain with the view of selling them. And it took me ages to get my head around this end consumer. I kept thinking, Mr. and Mrs. Smith walking in with their bucket and spade, or Mr. and Mr. Contractor. But in fact, that totally wasn't it. My end consumer is actually who's going to purchase the chain of hotels. So yeah, how do you sort of come about understanding that? Is that just a time scale like I did? I had to sort of go through a process of thinking through in my head, and then suddenly it kind of came to me, or?
Well, you touch on a really big point there. So many people build a lifestyle, they don't build a business, right? So a lifestyle is something that you and your partner might run, or you might give to your children. We talk a lot about legacy and property, and you might give it to your children, whether they want the business or not, you might give it to them anyway. But, we talk a lot about this, and that's what's called a lifestyle business. So we don't build lifestyle businesses. I don't build lifestyle businesses with the people that I work with, and I don't build lifestyle businesses inside of our own business. I build businesses that have an entrance door and an exit door. In other words, you know, the entrance door is when you go into that business and you build that business, and the exit door is ideally when somebody buys that business from you. So it's an entrance door and an exit door, right? And I think you need both in a good quality business. Now, if you want investors, outside investors in, then you definitely, I'm now, you know, moving to being an angel investor, and eventually when we sell up, probably a small scale venture capitalist. And venture capitalists and angel investors aren't interested in your lifestyle and legacy. They're interested in when are you selling the business and when do we get a big paycheck.
Yeah.
And you know that's why people find it quite confusing that I'm selling up a very profitable debt-free portfolio. Why would you do that? That also has 60% commercial, so therefore, you know, fairly solid leases and very good income. Is because to me, having that exit from a business for multi-million pounds, right, in front of other venture capitalists gives me real credibility. Whereas they wouldn't be interested if I was sitting down with a table of venture capitalists and saying, you know, I want to play too. Well, what have you got? I've got a lifestyle business I'm going to give to my son and my wife. It's that exiting the business that actually gives me credibility as a venture capitalist and angel investor, and also lots of funds as well. So most people are only looking at the entrance door. They're not looking at the exit door. And to answer your initial question about the book's written in a very simplistic way. I'm severely dyslexic, and my wife's a 1-1 from Glasgow University in English and a professional writer. And when she writes, she tends to write at a level that is beyond me as a dyslexic's ability to read. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I said to her, look, you know, I want to write this so that any 12-year-old, because that's about my reading age, is about 12, right? Which incidentally in the United Kingdom is not that unusual. There are many, many people who leave school with a reading age of about 12. And I wanted it to be able, any 12-year-old or somebody with a reading ability of a 12-year-old to be able to pick this up and understand it. So it's done in chunks, in chapters that cover each individual part of the plan. Is there an order you should do it in? No. You'll find your order. You know, the person who buys it today will find their order. And it's a bit like going for an exam. The way you should use the book is it's a bit like going for an exam in school. What they tell you in school when you do an exam is read the first question. If you don't know the answer, move on. And then do the second question. Don't get stuck on the first question. The way I do it, you're dead right, you've been around me for a long time now, almost a year, is I start with the customer avatar. So I ignore probably the first X amount of chapters and I start with the customer. But that's not to say you should do it that way. That's just to say that all my businesses are customer focused. And I'm looking at two customers, which is what you're doing now, Emma. I'm looking at the customer who comes across the door and actually pays money. And then I'm looking at the customer that's going to buy the business.
Yeah. And in fact, Robin's put a really great point here. He's put in, interesting, Emma. You found out that your customer adds the value to your business rather than being the stopping point, and that the true value of what the true value of each customer brings. So yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Robin.
So I'll give you a real example from one of our businesses, Emma, talking about customers and longevity and value of customer, right? So there's three things you've got to think about a customer. What's your customer acquisition cost? So what does it actually cost you to get that customer in the first place? Now, our average customer acquisition cost is £500. Our average customer, these are averages, our average customer value is £30,000.
Okay.
So if you imagine that you've just won the lottery and you say, I'd quite like to buy your business, Paul, right? When you look at that ratio of customer acquisition cost relative to customer value, you can say this is a solid business. Because essentially, take away the running cost of that customer, which is about another £1,000 over the lifetime of that customer in maintenance and time spent, right? Customer in total cost is £1,500. Customer in total value is 30,000. So you've essentially got £28,500 in each one of those customers. So by looking at the amount of customers that that particular business has, you can value that business very, very quickly. That's without the fixed assets of the business. That's just the customer value of the business.
Okay. Because a lot of these are kind of like chicken and egg, aren't they? For some people, it's kind of, you know, knowing where to go. So when, you know, the average person who's probably coming on here at some stage has thought, you know, buy to let, you know, so I'm looking, you know, maybe like to, you know, grow it, and you know, I've got these clients. So obviously you've got, you know, a normal family, for instance, who might rent your property. You might then want to go to the council and get the council to rent it for social housing. You might want to change it to I don't know, to an HMO or to different things. So is that what you're kind of implying, that, you know, if you look in this area, this is what you're going to get, or even on a sort of a serviced accommodation basis? Is that kind of what you're saying?
I think a lot of people get into property and they're property obsessed. You know, there was an old TV program, if you remember right, location, 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 right? And sometimes when I speak to property people, I hear property, 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 right? And it's almost like, I bought this property, it's at the right price, it's in a good location. What about the customer? The customer will just come. Build it and they will come, right? And whilst that is a business philosophy, it's not a well-supported business philosophy in terms of business investment. So if you went to the average, you know, professional angel investor, or you went to the average venture capitalist and said, you know, I am going to build this and the people will come, then most people wouldn't invest in it. I'll give you a real story of this. I remember driving outside of a place called Stirling in Scotland, but bonny wee place, Stirling. Got a beautiful castle and Wallace's monument and lots of pretty things, right? We had the Battle of Stirling Bridge in Stirling, where we fought back the English. I don't want to get political about it, but we won. Right? And I'm driving out of Stirling main town centre, and I'm driving along this nice street, and I comes across a bike shop on the corner, and it seemed completely out of context. You know, why would there be a bike shop there? And because I am business obsessed, it would be fair to say, right? I have no interest in bikes at all. I've never owned one. I probably owned one when I was a child, but I can't remember. But I've certainly never owned one as an adult, and certainly never wore those tight lycra that other people wear. It wouldn't work for me. Anyway, not a picture you want in your head. It's just not a picture you want in your head. So I went into this bike shop, and I'm looking around, and there's beautiful bikes and really expensive bikes and lots of stuff. And I got talking to the guy behind the counter, as is my one, and it turned out he was the shop owner. And I said to him, so I take it, he said, oh, I love bikes, and, you know, I've been riding bikes for blah, 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 blah. And I said, so interesting place to have a shop then. Why did you put the shop here? And he said, and I quote, I live just around the corner. And I said, so you think because you put the bike shop here, people will come to you? And he was like, yeah, we've got the best bikes in the area. 6 months later, I drove past and that bike shop was gone. Because he thought he could build it and they would come. Now, the likelihood is that had he have spent some market research and found out where people who buy bikes want to buy bikes from, where people who buy bikes live, where the kind of best location is for them, and where the easiest parking, etc. is for them. In fact, if he'd just probably spent 6 months on market research, it's likely he would still have a successful bike shop today. But he did the build it and they will come. I'll give you another example of market research. We sold a development site a couple of years ago, and I had put lots of market research into the types of houses that should be there, the demographics and the values of the houses. A lot of work, probably about a year's work. And one of the chaps that bought one of the houses from us changed it from a 3-bedroom to a 4-bedroom. And because I am business obsessed and market research obsessed, I went back to him and said, that's really interesting. I see you've put planning in to turn it into a 4-bed house, because my market research said it should be this value and it should be 3 beds. So what's your new market research? And what did I miss? And he said, well, me and the wife were talking about it. And we said if we were buying a house there, we'd want a 4-bedroom. Now, you're laughing at that. How many people listening to this on whatever medium it is are making their market research decisions based on what they would do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very interesting. So trying to sort of open up people's understanding of where to go and what to start with, because inherently it is all about starting, isn't it? And what certainly in the property world, there's just this huge kind of shiny penny syndrome, isn't there? Especially if you're new to property, you kind of walk in and you're suddenly exposed to all these different opportunities. Where can you sort of advise them how to kind of hone that down, for instance? Is it, you know, something that they love doing? Is it, you know, a need in their area? Is it, you know, a type of new property, you know, a new way you can build? Where would you advise somebody who's coming into this fairly new and have, you know, gone on a training course or something and now are just completely overwhelmed?
Well, it's quite interesting. I've spent a lot of time now, as I say, as a business consultant with smaller businesses, and I don't tend to focus in the property area because we have interest in other businesses, and I have a 45-year career in business. But if I do get involved with somebody with inside property, I almost say to them, right, whatever you have learned in a particular training course, right, about a particular strategy, can we just leave that at the door? Now, I'm not saying you have to throw it away, but can we at least leave it at the door? And can we come inside the door of this is a business? It's not a strategy. It's not a passive income. It's a business. In fact, I had somebody approach me about business consultancy from Clubhouse. And they said, look, could you help me? And I looked at what they had and I said, I'm not really understanding the business here. And she was like, oh, I don't really want a business. I'm just looking for passive income. I said, well, if you look at my card, madam, it says on my card, business consultant. It does not say passive income consultant. I'm not a passive income consultant. I'm a business consultant. So when you want a business, come back and talk to me, right? So I try to kind of leave, as a business consultant, I try to leave all of that passive income stuff and strategy stuff at the door. I'm not saying there's not parts of it you can pick back up again, but come into the business house, come through the business door. Right. And then let's look at it as a business. Now, all of those questions that you said are relevant. What business do you want to be in? Here's a really tough question that I ask people when I start with them as a business consultant. What job do you want? And if people say, I don't want a job, I say, well, you're likely, if you're starting a business, to have a job. Now, whether that job's CEO, whether that job's, you know, marketing, whether that job is in accounts, whatever that job is, right? Then you're going to have a job, right? So on my business cards, it says managing director, because my 2 jobs are to manage that business, which I do less and less, and direct that business, which I do more and more. What direction is the business going in? So going back all of those years ago, Emma, when I first got into property and sat down and wrote my first business plan, the one that you've got in front of you now, right, and the book to help you go through it, I had a goal. I said I didn't have a goal. I didn't have a goal. Not a word I would use now or then, right? But I had an outcome for the business. And the outcome for the business was, I wrote a 5-year business plan. The outcome for the business was to have £1 million worth of debt-free property. That's important. Debt-free property in 5 years. Because I hear many people say they've got a £10 million, portfolio. But let's be honest, they probably owe £7.5 or £8 million of that to someone else. In fact, I was talking to somebody recently who had a combination of investment funding and commercial funding in a £10 million portfolio, and they had 300 grand of equity. So they didn't have a £10 million portfolio, they had a £300,000 portfolio. Because if everything was to be sold tomorrow, because that's how you value a business, if everything was to be sold tomorrow, what's the bottom line? We are very privileged. When everything's sold, it won't be tomorrow, but when everything's sold, we will have a substantial figure. That's a 7-figure sum after everybody's paid. They have 300 grand in a £10 million portfolio. So I wanted a £1 million debt-free portfolio in 5 years. What we actually achieved was a £1.2 million debt-free portfolio in 3.5 years.
Wow. And do you think that, I'm sort of wondering whether to go into these. So we've got a few people, I think we ought to pick it up because they're kind of going into a longer stage here. So we've got Imran said, build and they will come does work for some companies. Apple is a casing example. We've got build and they will come. When you look at Apple, with property rentals, as there is such a serious shortage, build it and they will come can and does work, and often hides the lack of business understanding of the business owner. Steve Jobs didn't really care about customers' opinions. He knew best. Robin said who, what, why. So it kind of, it carries on through. Did you want to?
I hate to disagree with Imran. He's such a wise man. However, I'm going to, right? I think if he looks into, and I know the history of Apple quite well, it's one of the kind of case studies that I use on a regular basis. And I do not think Apple in any way, shape or form had a build it and they will come mentality, right? What Steve Jobs had was an idea of bringing the laptop, if you like, or the PC into everybody's home, right? And Steve Jobs gets a lot of credit with inside of that business for a lot of the vision. And Steve Jobs didn't have that much vision. You know, it was actually one of the designers when Steve Jobs wasn't in the business that actually redesigned the Apple product and gave us the distinctive Apple product that we have today. Steve Jobs' product, when he first brought it to market, didn't have any curb appeal at all. It was ugly. And it sold to techie people, right? So I think Imran's kind of version of how, Apple are where they are to do it today doesn't really reflect the true story of Apple. Apple was a visionary company, but they were visionary because they understood their customer. Steve Jobs understood the original nerd customer. And then as Apple grew, and the real vision of Apple that's here today, with all the kind of, visual appearance of Apple, was actually done by a designer at the point where Steve Jobs wasn't even in the business anymore. So I think we need to talk about the facts of this build it and they will come. There's an interesting kind of thing about the kind of instant overnight successes of businesses. Dyson's another one. I've had the opportunity to speak on a stage with the founder of Dyson and be in the green room with him. And Dyson, like this overnight success story that took 25 years to build. And actually, if you spend time around really successful people who have built major businesses, which I've had the privilege of doing, as being part of a professional speaker. In fact, it's one of the reasons I got into professional speaking was to rub shoulders with the good and the great. And when you hear their real life stories, it's all about planning for the vast majority of them. And because they start in a back bedroom, the way that Amazon does, doesn't mean that Amazon always planned to be in a back bedroom and he accidentally got into multiple £1 million outlets across the world. That happened by design, not by accident. But I think lots of people want to buy into this idea that you just build it and it will come, because for the vast majority of people, the idea of sitting down and taking 6 months or a year to write a business plan and going through all the nuts and bolts of that and doing all the market research is not something that appeals to them. They like the idea of this overnight successes.
Yeah.
Actually, when you look at the reality of everything from Apple through to Amazon, through to Google, through to McDonald's, there's a lifetime of vision behind that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so you had your goal in inverted commas there to have this, 1 million debt-free property portfolio in 5 years. So just for somebody else, because that could be a goal for lots of people. So what was then the next step after that? To get that strategy, to get that, so was it what,
well,
how,
let me take you back on that, because I think you're asking an interesting question, right? Why £1 million and why 5 years? Right. And it's quite interesting. So I'd been self-employed for the vast majority of my life, and I had a minimal pension plan, and it kind of struck me at the point I was kind of just in my early 30s when I got into property, and it struck me that I couldn't put enough in my pension plan on a month-to-month basis from what I was earning to have a reasonable size pension by the time I wanted to retire, right? And I spoke to various pension providers, and the figure at that point in time that kept coming up for a pension that would give me a comfortable living was £1 million. So I'm a big fan of and I'm not a fan of many people, but I am a fan of Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And Stephen Covey says, start with the end in mind. So what was my end that was in mind? My end was to build a retirement plan.
So would that end be like the need? Would you call that like a need?
No, I don't like being driven by need. I think we make bad decisions being driven by need. Desire's a much better word.
Like it.
I am hopefully a happily married man, and I've been married for a number of years, and I hope my wife still desires me and doesn't need me. They're two very different things. I'm not sure either's true, incidentally, but I would like to think, right, one rather than the other. Right? But I think that's a good explanation of need and desire. Yeah.
I like the comparison. Okay.
So I wanted to take 5 years out of my life and build a pension pot, right? And once I did that in 3.5 years, I thought, right, and I remember, sitting down and kind of thinking, so what now, Paul? Right? Do you want to go back to your day job, right? Or do you want to build this into what I would class as a real business? So then I sat down and I wrote another 5 years plan that would take that 1 million to multiple millions. And then when that 5-year plan was finished, I wrote another 5-year plan. And even though we're exiting the business now, I have an exit plan. Right. And I'll tell you why these are so important to me. Right. Maybe I'm not self-disciplined enough, Emma. Right. Maybe I need somebody to kind of tell me what to do. Right. I got married a few years ago, so that kind of works on that front. But other than that, in business, I need somebody to tell me what to do. And my business plan tells me where I should be and where I shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And the more detail that you put into that business plan, the more that you can be comfortable with what's happening in the outside world. So let me give you a real solid example of that. So when I was writing my business plan a few years ago to move into retirement, right, which is about into its kind of, or sell up the portfolio, which is into about 3 years now of the 5 years, right? I had, on each individual property, I had 2 exit numbers, a desired exit number and an acceptable exit number. Now, do you think over the last few months and over the months to come that my desirable number might be harder to achieve?
Maybe, yes.
But do you think my accepted number will be easier to achieve? Now, can you imagine sitting down with a portfolio like us, right, and pontificating for hours on end about, well, if we'd have sold it last year, we'd have got X, but we're selling it this year and we're getting Y. Should we take Y? Should we? Can you imagine how long you could pontificate over that?
Yeah.
But when you have two fixed figures in your plan, one for growth in the market and one for recession in the market, and you're happy with both of those figures, can you see how easy it is to just move on?
Yeah.
So there'll be people right now thinking, should I sell? Right? Because last year, if I'd have sold, I'd have got X, but this year I'm only going to get Y. Right? Or there'll be people in the audience saying, well, should I sell? Because I'm going to have to pay all of this, capital gains tax. Right? But if you've already sat down and have a business plan and have taken all of that into consideration and come up with numbers, right, that you can be comfortable with, and you see how easy the decisions are.
Yeah, flows much better, doesn't it?
Well, I just think people get caught up in procrastination very easily.
Yeah, we need parameters, don't we? That's inherently what you've provided there, is that parameters. As long as you're sticking within that, then it's easy to make that decision, yes or no, isn't it? It's kind of
and there's another point about that. Do you think that was a much easier decision to make when I was sitting thinking about it hypothetically, right, and logically, right, and on rational numbers? What does that cost? How much has it earned over the years we've owned it, right? And making a rational decision rather than making the decision when there's an offer on the table, which is an emotional decision.
Yeah, and in fact, even something to compare that to something very simplistic, even when I sit down on a Sunday night and I plan the week, you sit there, you've got your quiet time, you're planning what you want to do, and then suddenly it'll come to sort of Thursday or something, and I'm looking at, what it is that I need to have fulfilled for that week. And I think as you progress and you've got so many things hitting you from all directions, your mindset is looking in a very different way. And quite often I'll look back and go, for what, let's think why I decided that those were the most important things for this week, and let's go back and stick to that. And it's so helpful. I'm getting it more and more. There's so much coming in, and actually it's the quadrant, isn't it? It's the important and urgent, and not important and not urgent, and all those kind of things. You're sort of pulled into it. So I suppose it's along the way on that longer term vision, when you have that sat there, if you're then giving yourself these parameters, it's much easier, isn't it, to make the decision. And I think especially I'm learning about, what's it called, decision fatigue. And I'm seeing it more and more, that if you're in that kind of decision fatigue and you've got so many decisions to make, with a simple, with simple steps and simple parameters, whether it be the business plan, whether it be purchasing or selling within these prices, it's like, boom, I know that I've done the work, I've done the research, I know this is all going to go well within these parameters. I can say yes or no. If it's not within those parameters, then don't go ahead. So yeah, really, really interesting. I'm
really okay on going ahead if it's above the upper limit.
Let me think about that.
I'm just not so keen on going ahead if it's below the lower limit, right? But I've set reasonable limits in there that are reasonable expectations, right? And yeah, occasionally when the market was a bit silly, it did go above the kind of expectation. But to be honest with you, the way that I tend to deal with people is there's the number, right? And that's it. So it made it relatively easy for me. But I was just using that as an example of one of the, many things that you put into a business plan that you don't then need to make day-to-day decisions about.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So
and it keeps you away from, sorry, let me make this point because it's very important, particularly in property. It keeps you away from the shiny pennies.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry if I sound like I'm going back over it, but we've spoken about your desire of, for instance, to give your example, 1 million in 5 years. And the reason behind that was for this pension pot. But how did you then get from, okay, this is what I need, this is the pension pot, this will sort it, from making that decision? You spoke about, I could go back to my day job, but what enabled you to then find that route that would get you to, well, it got you quicker in the end. So you had 1.2, I think you said, in 3 years. So how did you get from, you'd worked it through, you'd got your...
So we built a business model, right? I'm big on business models. If you've heard me speak, and not only do I talk a lot about business plans, but I build a lot of business models. And I would say that as a consultant, that's probably one of the things with smaller businesses that I tend to do. But it's also true when you go into bigger PLCs as well. You know, I'll be brought in to look at a particular kind of aspect of a PLC and build a business model within that aspect. So if you look at, you know, a big box store, I remember being brought in on a big box store that was bringing optics in, and they hadn't done optics before. So I had to build an optics business inside of the bigger business with a business model for that optics business. And it's kind of one of the things that I do relatively well is build business models. So we built a business model, and obviously that business model outperformed the business plan.
Okay.
Now, what that tells you is that the business model functions very, very well, because it functioned not below expectations, but above expectations, right? Now, the interesting thing was, even though that was in property, if you look back at it, that wasn't market driven. That was the business model driven. Because I remember speaking to a chap in Edinburgh before the crash and looking at his business model. And I said to him, the way that the market's growing in Edinburgh at the moment, this was about 2006. I said, the way the market's growing at the moment, if you just bought that property and held on to it for the 8 or 10 months that you've been doing the refurb and not spent any money on refurb, you would have actually made a larger profit because the market's growing. And he couldn't take that on board. It was beyond his understanding, right? So he actually lost money by doing development, because in that 8 months he was spending money on it. The overall GDV had grown, but then you take his expenditure and the margin was smaller than if he'd have just let the market growth and literally done nothing with it at all, not even rented it out, right? And he didn't understand that about his own business model. Our business model wasn't related to the market. So it wasn't you were in a good market, Paul, and the market growed. It was our way of adding value to property that added that value much quicker than we thought it was going to. Because the business model outperformed the timescale. So then when I looked at the next 5 years, I could say, right, okay, so here's the parts of the business model that are functioning really, really well. Because now I've got living proof of the business model. So when I first started it was hypothetical. Now I've got living proof. I can actually then do zero budgeting, look at the business model and say that part's functioning really, really well, Paul. So we can spend more time, effort and money on that part. This part isn't functioning as well. So we can actually like either, you know, make that smaller or do away with it completely. So then in the next 5 years, we managed to take that £1.2 million portfolio of debt-free properties into, I don't want to name the number because it sounds a bit conceited, but multiple times that. Because then we knew what worked really well. And I'm going to use the recipe analogy. And it's a very old analogy, but I'm going to use the recipe analogy of, in my older age, I've taken up cooking. I'm still rubbish at it, but I've taken up cooking, right?
And you've now got a wife to eat it.
Yes, but I'm eating much healthier now, and I shop at Waitrose now. It's very posh, and I'm kind of looking at the particular dishes that I call my kind of signature dishes, right? And when I first started making them, they were okay. So they were more than edible. They were okay. But can you imagine after you've done that several times and you've perfected just how much, you know, of X or Y to put in, you can actually get that to essentially the best it could be. Well, that's what a business plan does. You do the first business plan for say 5 years, and that gives you the essence of the recipe. Here's the ingredients, right? And it works, and it brings out a nice, you know, recipe at the end, right? You've got a nice cake if you want, right? And then you say, yeah, but okay, in the next 5 years, what could I add to that cake or subtract from that cake that wouldn't make it an okay cake, that would make it an excellent cake? Because you're still essentially building the same cake.
Okay. So just to double check, Paul, because I know we did start a little bit late. Are you okay just to run over a little bit to get some bits done?
Well, I think we started at 12 minutes past, really. So I think if we run about 12 minutes past, that would be the hour.
Perfect. Okay, so with this, talking about the business model and not being market driven, I'm going to come back to the chat box, because there's a lot of a lot of chat going on between Imran and James. So Imran has come back to and said, so buy to let, build it and they will come is a viable strategy due to the serious shortage of rentals, ... comment. And then there's kind of a lot more that's been talking about London. Yeah, I think there's a lot kind of written there. But again, this is kind of quite interesting. So you're talking about business model and not market driven. So it sounds like Imran is talking about market driven there. Could you just clarify that for us?
Well, I don't like market. I mean, Imran can be in a market driven business if he wants, right? But I don't like being in market driven businesses. And here's why, right? Imran has absolutely no impact on that market. He has no impact at all, right? So I seen this in 2007 when the market was booming and development was everywhere and everybody was kind of saying, get money. You could get as much money off the banks as you wanted. And the whole market was being driven by outside factors in the business, not inside factors. Now, I've had this conversation in one of my own rooms with Imran. We're going to agree to differ. He likes businesses where he follows the market. I like businesses where I create the market. He's quite happy being a follower. I prefer being a leader of the market. So, no, but lots of people are quite happy. I mean, there are major brands that are followers of the market. And Imran comes from, a corporate background, and he was probably in that corporate following the market. So there's lots of people and lots of businesses that we could name right now that are following market trends. And they feed from those market trends. Now that's one particular business model. It's a market-driven business model. I personally don't like market-driven business models. I like that we drive the market, that we create the market, that we know the market, and that we are the leader in the market. Right? And there's the old adage about being a leader in your field, right? We have tried to build businesses where we're not the leader in the field, we actually own the farm.
Okay.
And other people are quite happy, and other businesses are quite happy to follow the market trend. Now, nothing that Imran as an individual will do will sustain that desirability of rental properties at this moment in time. That's happening outside of Imran's kind of control, but he can take advantage of it, but he can't control it. So therefore, if it changes, he has to change his entire business model because outside factors have changed. Whereas if you look at our particular kind of niche marketing and our genre, if you like, that we deal in, then the outside market doesn't hugely affect it.
Okay.
So different business models. Imran's clearly happy following the market and will react to, so any business that you're in that's following the market has to react to the market. So you're constantly in reaction in that type of business. It's the nature of the business, right? Now, some people love the cut and thrust of that. Oh, the market's changed, I have to change. They kind of, they get an emotional high out of that. I personally don't. I like my market to be as it is and not really hit the peaks and troughs of things that I have no control over.
Okay. So I'm still trying to get my head around this. So we've been talking about, a business model that's not market driven, but surely, but it's not Apple, which could be construed as, creating something that we didn't know that we needed until we had it, so to speak. But it would sound here like you are, a visionary. If you're creating a market, if you're building a farm, that would make you a visionary and more like an Apple. So where would you get this kind of knowledge that there is a need for a farm so to speak? Because, you know, we've talked about this kind of, you know, spending a long time on market research and stuff like that. Is that not part of being market driven?
Well, that's the key, isn't it? We're still talking about the same thing here, Matt, right? You know, to a certain extent, somebody like Imran is saying this is a very busy market at the moment. There's more demand than there is supply, right? So if I build it, they will come because there's more demand than there is supply. But Imran would be the first to admit that he's not creating that demand. It's not anything that Imran is doing with inside his business that builds that economic climate. He's just taking advantage of the economic climate that already exists, right? Reactionary business. If, however, you've done a lot of market research, right, and you establish that there's an absolute, not desire, but need for your product, right, then that isn't market driven.
Okay.
So let me put some meat on the bones of that for you in a very simplistic way. So we own quite a bit of commercial property, and we tend to, most people when they think about commercial property thinks about offices and shops, if you like, and we don't own either offices or shops. We own a lot of small industrial units, right? And we have a rule within our industrial estates that we only take on what are called essential services. So if you came to me and you said, I want to take one of your units, Paul, right, and I sell nice hats, right, and my hat business is doing extremely well, we wouldn't take you on as a customer. Because your hat business, right, is when people start running out of money, then they don't buy hats. It's one of the first things to fall off the list. They've got enough hats, right? I'm sure you've got enough hats to live your lifetime, right? And it's only when you've got disposable income that you'll buy more hats. Now, if you came to me and you said, I have a tire repair business, Paul, then we would let you in, because no matter what happens to the economy, and no matter what happens in people's lives, and no matter how restricted they are for cash, if your tire is either wore out or you get a puncture, what are you going to do, Emma?
Yeah, I need to go and get it done.
You need to go and get it done. So we only let essential service businesses into our industrial estate.
So how
so
would
that
you...
the end customer, not our customer, but the end customer needs that service. And as long as our customer keeps competitive, they will keep busy. And that, as a principle, as a business model, has lasted over 2 decades for us and been very successful.
Yeah, that's, yeah, really very interesting. Sort of the, you know, the talking about, you know, not doing anything that sort of Amazon does, for instance, as well, isn't it? It's Amazon proofing your business, I think they call it. So how, you know, just looking and being a bit selfish from my perspective, in the kind of hospitality world then, so when you're looking at that kind of market, I mean, that is not necessarily a need in that area, but we know, and I know we've had that conversation, that it is a big sort of growth area. There's a lot of people very interested in that. How do you look at that kind of thing? I'm just trying to, you think so differently, Paul, to the way I think. I really love kind of, you know, hearing how you start thinking about these things. So how would you look at something like that?
Well, it's quite interesting. We've discussed this offline, that a lot of the venture capitalists are getting very, very interested now in leisure time, right? So I think there's 2 aspects to a business like yours that I would be looking at. One is there is contractors that need that space, right? So they're on a need basis. So that's an absolute need customer, right? They're not coming to, you know, to stay in your apartment hotel or your serviced accommodation because they want to be beside the beach. They're coming there because they're working in that area and they have a need for accommodation. As long as you can tick the appropriate boxes, then you fulfill their need, not their desire, right? But here's an interesting one, and this is why a lot of venture capitalists are now looking at the whole leisure industry. It is clear that AI is going to free up a lot. Now, whether you agree with AI or whether you don't agree with AI, And that we don't have the time to get into that discussion. But whether you do or whether you don't, it's going to have an effect on people's jobs, right? And it's either going to put people out of jobs, in which case they'll have no disposable income, or it's going to reduce the amount of hours that they need to work in their job, right? But still have disposable income and also have disposable time. Now, what are people going to do with that? What do people need to do with that disposable time? And the likelihood is the culture that we live in today, the vast majority of people are going to spend that disposable time and disposable income on leisure activities. Because if you'd have went back to my dad's generation, my dad's, if he was still with us, would be over 100 years old. At that point in time, my dad would have probably went out and got another job because he had 6 kids to feed. But the mentality of the culture of the 21st century is if you have disposable income and you have disposable time, you spend it in leisure. That's the zeitgeist of society today. Ergo, people are going to have more disposable time, possibly more disposable income, and they're going to spend it in leisure. Now, whether your business has to become more competitive is a different question, which is part of your building the business model. But you've got 2 potential audiences there. You've got one with a need and one with a desire.
Okay.
And that's why a lot of the serious venture capitalists, I'm talking about venture capitalists who have got 100, 200, 300 million to spend, are looking at the leisure industry.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Brilliant. Well, look, we have now reached 12 minutes past. I can see we've had a fantastic, I'm not reading them all out, but we've had a fantastic backwards and forwards discussion in the chat. So I really appreciate Imran, James and Robin. You've been putting some great stuff in there and having a good chat. But yeah, Paul, I have put a link to your book. And as I say, for me, having these discussions with you is so incredible. In fact, you are an older version, no disrespect, to my 17-year-old son, who is also dyslexic, who I'll say something and he'll say, well, why don't you do it like that? In that kind of annoyed teenager way. And I kind of look at him and I put my ego aside and I think, yeah, I should have done it like that. But it just would never have come to me. And that's why I find it really interesting, these kind of conversations with people who think and look at things so inherently differently to the way you look at it. So I really appreciate you coming here and yet again, sort of helping me to attempt to look at these things very differently. And I suppose getting out of our own way, changing our paradigms, whatever it is that we want to talk about, is to try and see things in a different way. And I'm looking at needs and desires very differently, and so many things that is there. But I'd really appreciate, Paul, if you could, give us a sort of a closing comment.
I think you make a key point there, and we all spend our lives, in different ways. I've been studying business since I was 12, believe it or not. Does my first business study course when I was 18, which was 3 years after I went into business, and have been studying some of the greatest minds in business ever since. But because I am dyslexic, I think there's a yin and a yang to everything. And I kind of go into businesses, and it's one of the things I really enjoy about being a business consultant. And I always use the Rubik Cube analogy. You've met those people who can just pick up a Rubik Cube. I'm not one of them, incidentally, and they can just go click, 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 and all the colours come up in about 2 minutes. Well, I kind of have that brain when it comes into business, because I've been studying it for so long. That's an awful lot of years to be studying business, and all of the progressions in business and all the thinking in business and all the different business models that are available. To have studied that for as many years as I have, the vast majority of the time I can go into any small to medium-sized business and I can look at it like a Rubik Cube and go click, 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 there you go, it works better now. And that's not because I'm smarter than anybody else or more capable than anybody else. It's because I have dedicated a lifetime to business.
I see. I love it. Well, look, thank you again, Paul. Really appreciate you coming here. So, guys, this will be on YouTube just by the end of this week, if not before. So if you haven't subscribed, please do. You'll hear lots of people saying it's a challenge to get subscribers, and I'm very early in my journey. So if you are able to subscribe, that would be much appreciated. It's Emma Howitt, Pure Abodes. And I'm really excited. Next week, we have got Chris Dornan, who is a really great friend of mine. His topic is purpose-driven developments. So it'll be great to catch up with him next week. So again, at 12 noon, and next week it will be on SA Q&A House. And I will maybe be asking you, Paul, what on earth I'm doing wrong to not get these things recorded, because it definitely, I double checked it this time and it's still not being recorded, so I'm clearly doing something wrong. But anyway, thank you everyone, really appreciate you being here, and yeah, look forward to seeing you next week. And again, thank you, Paul, take care.